It's my first video of the year. Welcome to 2021. This one's going to be tough. So as you guys know, 2020 was a total disaster in a lot of ways, and for us, it was about the bees. And we had the hardest beekeeping year I've ever had. Last spring, it started out about a year ago, where it was snowing and cold right into May. We had snow in May last year. The apple trees never blossomed. All our spring flowers just didn't seem to come out, and the bees had stores from the winter that they hadn't used up yet, so they had food, but there was nothing to forage last spring. Then the spring hit and it was dry, really dry. So when the flowers from the summer started coming up, they just had no nectar. And the bees spent the entire summer last year just struggling to find resources. The entire year they were just behind, and the hives were empty. I was feeding my nukes starting in August. I fed the bees all through the fall just to get them into the winter, just to save what I could save. But the gist of it is that they had a really hard year, and by the time the fall hit, they were all weak. And I fed them for about 8 or 9 weeks straight last fall, just perpetual syrup on the hives, just to get them to suck down whatever they could. I thought they all had stores in there. I mean, there was nothing else I could do, just offer them food for 8 weeks. Wrapped them all up like I always do, and just hope for the best. And I was hoping for a mild winter, at least some kind of break. And what happened was we had about 2 months straight of very few days above freezing. So with the small colonies and that kind of cold for that long of a time, I have a feeling that there are not a lot of survivors here today. Yesterday it hit 50, today it hit 60, and it's gonna get cold again, but everything's melting. It's a warm day. I'm gonna go in there and open up everybody. So on a 60-degree day, there should be activity in front of these hives, and there's no activity. This is a bad sign. All the way around the bee yard, it's the same story so far on any hive. We have bees here. That's the only hive right now that is flying. That hive actually looks pretty good. But that is the only hive right now that's moving. So I'm going to open up all of these hives right now and see if there's any small clusters. See if there's any other living bees in this entire bee yard. Full of honey, full of sugar. This was a little nuke. There's no way this is alive. They're just all dead on the bottom of the hive. The Russians, I mean, even the Russians, I can't believe what happened this year. All the sugar I put in here. Lucy hive. They're just all dead at the top, like lying in the sugar. So much honey up here in these hives. It's like they didn't make it very far into winter because they didn't eat much food. There's honey all the way across here. This is one of my stronger hives going into fall. The oddball hive. Oh, we've got life in here. There's bees in here. This is good news, unless they're getting robbed by the other hive. I think this is just a robbing situation. All right, I think these bees may be from the neighboring hive, because there's nothing else going on in here. Okay, the Una hive. I see a mite. That bee has a mite on it. This is the back left hive. This is a pretty strong one. And then Adrian was my strongest hive last year. This one right here. It's a little cluster right there. Here's the queen right there. That's our queen. And they had her surrounded. It's just when the cluster gets that big, I mean, they're not gonna live. They just, too many bees died too early in the year. Okay, Adrian hive. This was my largest hive in the last 2 summers. Just totally strong. This is a Balboa granddaughter. I don't know how it could have died. It was so hopping. Just so strong. Population was way up. There's the queen. There's the queen right there. That little tiny golf ball sized cluster around the queen. You know, they hung on right to the end. The old Dorothy rainbow swarm. Yeah, they ate all their sugar. This hive made it a lot longer than the others. Ton of honey. I can see mites on the bees. I mean, it's not like they're covered, but I've seen, you know, 1 or 2 mites in every hive, like on a bee right at the top. Singing Cedars apiary. This was a strong hive last year, very strong. Nothing. Okay, this was a Cornelia daughter. Wow, there's brood in here. Okay, out of all these bees right here, I see 3 varroa mites on 2, 4, 6. Out of 11 bees on that frame, I see 3 varroa right there. And that's a brood frame. Why is there a brood frame right there? There's the queen. Varroa. Varroa. There's 3 mites right on that bee. You see the mites on there? There's 3 or 4 mites on, maybe 5 mites on every bee. All right, so some good news. This was an Adrian split. That was a resource hive last summer that graduated to a full-size hive. I think sort of like mid-year. Oh, slamming! All right, that makes me happy. That makes me really happy. This is a slamming colony. And I don't want to disturb them, so I'm going to put this right back. They got to have a queen in there with that many bees. That's not a queenless colony. I'm going to give, they have plenty of sugar right there. I'm going to put a couple frames out front for them to rob. So good news, we have one awesome colony here. Nothing I can do. I mean, we're going to go back down to the 20s in the next couple days, but this hive made it this far. If they have enough food, they're going to be okay. Just got off the phone with George at Autumn Morning Farm. If you are in need of bees, give George a call. If you're in the Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, area, you can drive to Barre, Massachusetts to pick up bees. George is just the most kind, knowledgeable, just the nicest dude. Give him a call, tell him I said hi, and get some bees there. I just ordered 3 new packages of bees. He said they're going to be in May 3rd, I think. So May 3rd, I'm going to get 3 new packages. I ordered a Buckfast, a VSH, and an Italian package. The queens are going to come from him up here, northern Queens, but the packages I think come up from the south somewhere. But May 3rd, we'll have new bees in the bee yard. All right, so we lost 13 out of 14 colonies, and I didn't do a deep dive autopsy on any of the hives to see exactly what killed them. My spidey sense intuition tells me that they probably went into winter pretty weak, and we had a really harsh winter, and the cold kills off bees and the clusters get smaller, and then the hives don't have that engine inside to keep these boxes warm. No matter how much you wrap them, you know, if it's a small cluster, they're not going to warm up what needs to be warm in there. And especially when you have a winter that's as cold as the one we just had, the clusters just aren't going to be able to maintain the heat. And they slowly die off, and then the cluster gets smaller, makes it harder to maintain heat, and they have to keep it warm for like 4 months. So they just weren't able to do it. This box did it though. I don't know how they did it. It's exposed. It's the back corner of the bee yard. There's no arborvitae trees here blocking wind. It's on the end, it's on the edge, it's in the back. Like, I don't know. It somehow survived when all the others didn't. And it just so has it that this colony descended from Balboa. So it was Balboa, which then created the Adrian line. And the Adrian colony, I did a split, I think 2 summers ago. And then this colony was a resource hive over last winter. And then they graduated to a full-size hive in the spring of 2020. And then they overwintered into 2021. So this is a descendant of Balboa. So that line survives. So I only did a little glance at the clusters that were dead in the hives, and I noticed Varroa on those clusters. And I don't know what happened. I did my treatments in October like I did the previous year. Speaking to George on the phone just now, he suggested maybe because we had kind of a mild October, when you're doing those oxalic treatments, a lot of bees are out flying, foraging. You know, that time of year, they were looking for whatever they could get, which means when you're doing oxalic, you're not hitting those bees. And they come back into the hive and they can bring back, you know, Varroa from other hives. Especially when they're desperate that time of year, they're robbing other hives. So they're in other hives. If there were Varroa anywhere in the bee yard, they're going to spread it around and bring it back to all the hives. So I don't want to blame the treatment or the device I used, the Janos vaporizer. Everything worked. You know, it's just that I think it was just a timing thing. You know, and I think we had such a drought and such a dearth last year that all the bees were super desperate. And they could have found a hive 2 miles away from me that didn't treat at all, that was filled with Varroa. And these bees could have been bringing back Varroa from other hives, and they just didn't get hit by the oxalic when I did the oxalic. The year that I had my best survival rate, where I had 100% survival 2 years ago over the winter, I did the apivar strips. And those stay in the hive for like over a month. So every bee is in there and every bee is touching those strips. So every bee gets hit with the apivar. And it's just a more kind of potent, effective treatment where it's just in there, you know, and even when the bees fly out and come back, they're gonna cross a strip in that time frame. The oxalic is sort of like boom, it goes in. If the bee that had the Varroa was not in the hive, it's not going to get hit with the oxalic. So I may try going back to apivar and see how that works next winter. I also wanted to mention one more thing about the thing I showed you, where I showed you that cluster of bees that had a high concentration of Varroa, and I was seeing a lot of Varroa on the dead bees right at the tops of the hives. I was thinking in my brain that concentration of Varroa must have been throughout the hive. When you think about it, if there's Varroa in the hive and there's a big cluster of bees and that cluster gets smaller and smaller as bees die off, the Varroa are going to migrate to the living bees. So as the cluster gets smaller, the concentration of Varroa is going to get greater. And when you have a dozen or 20 bees or something at the very end hanging on in a little cluster, there's going to be a lot of Varroa there because they're trying to get to the last living bees to suck the bees dry. So just because there were a dozen Varroa on a dozen bees or on 5 bees doesn't mean that that concentration was throughout the entire hive. It just means that it was at the very end very concentrated. I'm sure the Varroa weakened the hives, but you know, I won't know exactly what killed them until I really dig deep in the autopsy. As I dismantle all these hives, I'm gonna look a little deeper, see if I notice any other kinds of disease. But I really think this all goes back to last year being so dry and there was such little nectar that all the hives were struggling. All the hives were desperate. And they were just all weak going into winter. And despite all the feeding, the wrapping, the treatments, when you got a weak colony, no amount of insulation is gonna make that thing get through the winter. So it is all very sad, and I don't want to dwell on it too much. The good news is we have one very, very strong colony left here. I ordered 3 new packages, so come May 3rd, we're going to have 4 colonies in the bee yard, and we're going to rebuild. And I don't expect to have a dozen colonies by the end of the year, but I do have a goal of having 4 or 5 or 6 strong colonies by the end of the year. So the goal is to build strong colonies, to treat them for Varroa, and to get through next winter. And just start over. Keep planting the field and keep trying to get the strongest colonies we can get so that we can survive the winters, because that's what it's all about. So that's the news here. Thanks for watching. Let's just hope things turn around, because I could really use a break 2021. Talk to you soon.